So we're here this afternoon at Manchester University's School of Computer Science, and we're talking to Toby Howard, who is the Director of Undergraduate Studies here and also runs this amazing school's computer animation competition, and it's that we want to talk about this afternoon. Toby, thank you ever so much for having us here. How did the school computer animation competition get started then?
It had a slightly strange beginning, actually, going back to 2008, a long time ago. We were celebrating 60 years of the digital computers. I'm sure you know the world's first...
Invented in Manchester.
The world's first stored program digital computer was invented and built in Manchester, and that's something very proud of, and we're always talking about it. And for the 60th anniversary, we wanted to do some celebrations. And we didn't just want it to be looking back at the history. We wanted to look at current technology and where it all fitted together. And we also wanted to get kids involved. And we had the idea, let's use the kids' computers to do something creative, exciting, fun, interesting. And we had the idea of the animation competition.
And over the last 7-8 years, how has the standard of the entries changed over that time?
I guess the biggest thing we've noticed is the sophistication.
Really?
In the early days, most of the entries that we got were done with a system called Alice, which is a 3D animation system. It's still around, it's still available, still fine, which is a Java-based animation system. And what you can do with Alice is limited by your imagination, like other things, but it has a certain signature to it, visual signature to it. And we found that over the years, as different types of software have become available, and probably most notably Scratch, and also for the older kids, Adobe Flash. The sophistication of what the kids can produce is just amazing. And looking back to 2008, I don't think we could have guessed that it would have gone in that direction.
Is that a technical sophistication in terms of the image quality and the animation that's produced, or is it about the storytelling side to what children produce?
It's absolutely both.
Okay, right.
And technically, we're seeing stuff that looks professional.
Wow.
It really looks like it's come out of a studio, but in fact, it's come out of a classroom. From a technical point of view. From a storytelling point of view, we see an enormous variety of imagination and ideas. And again, in the early days, things were fairly sort of... the same stories being told over and over again, like Goldilocks and things. But today we see a huge variety of stuff.
And what, if anything, has surprised you about the work that's submitted for the competition?
I think, but if I had to pick one thing that surprised me the most, it's what a kid as young as 8 or 9 can achieve. And not just technically, but artistically and in terms of story. And you think, and you sort of look at it and you check, was that really a schoolboy or a schoolgirl of age 8 or 9? Is that right? And it is, and that excites everybody involved with the competition and the teachers involved as well.
Do you have a particular favourite, Toby? Is there something that really stands out as a great example of this?
That's a really difficult question because since we've run the competition, we've had over 8,000 films submitted to us from kids aged between 7 and 18, working individually and in groups. But if I had to pick one that I think is one of my real favourites, it would be this.
think the rule is that it has to be scripted or programmed or keyframe animation, that you don't allow any stop motion animation to be submitted for the competition.
Our competition is specifically not for stop motion.
Okay.
We've always viewed that that's a different type of animation. Perfectly good, but a different type of animation. What we were originally intending to do was to kind of have a backdoor approach to get kids to think about programming.
Okay.
And when they're using Alice, that's what you get, because Alice is basically programming. And the same is true of Scratch, of course. You're building the animation by connecting the elements together. Stop motion animation is a perfectly good type of animation, but we feel it's significantly different from the other style, that it's best to separate them.
But you don't ask to see the original source code or the source files for the animations. You're judging this purely on the content of the film that's produced.
That is true. In fact, with Scratch, the kids do submit the actual Scratch file itself, which we could look at if we wish to. We generally don't, because the judging of the competition is done in terms of what's been achieved. Right. So we don't actually break it down and look at the quality of code.
It isn't a programming competition.
It's not a programming competition. There are lots of programming competitions. Our competition is about making creative animations and doing creative things with your computer.
So typically, are entries coming from teachers running this as an activity during lesson time, or an after-school club, or just really motivated individual students working in their own time?
We get all of that.
Okay.
We know for certain that some teachers run group activities, and every person in the class makes their own animation based on a theme, and they submit those. At the other end of the spectrum, we get people who are home educated and are just doing it as something they want to do for fun and for their own engagement. And we see all types.
It's a lovely opportunity for a cross-curricular project, drawing on computing, drawing on art, and linking that to another area of the curriculum.
Absolutely, yes. And we know that some teachers are using Scratch to teach programming, and as a kind of side effect, they're making a wonderful animation.
Do you think that filmmaking in general, perhaps digital filmmaking in particular, links to these notions, these ideas of computational thinking?
I think to a certain extent there are linkages between the two, aren't there? When you're making a film, you're having sequences of things happening, and you might sort of stack the sequence, do something else, and come back to the sequence. But perhaps I'm pushing the analogy a little bit too far. But I think there's a link between the two, certainly, yes.
Okay, if a teacher was wanting to introduce digital animation into their computing lessons, what would you recommend they do to get started?
I think the experience that we've seen with Scratch is very strong. Scratch is an excellent environment which teaches you how the fundamental concepts of programming, and of course you can link it to other devices now, Raspberry Pi and so on. So I would suggest Scratch as a starting point.
I think a lot of children will have encountered Scratch when they were at primary school. Halfway through secondary school, they might feel that they're ready to move on to something else. If they're really interested in digital animation, what would you recommend as the next step in that journey for them?
I think probably a 3D graphics and animation system where you do have to write some code, or you have to script things happening. And examples of that are Blender, which is a completely free open source system, or 3ds Max and Maya, which is freely available in schools from Autodesk.
That's great, thank you. Okay, and finally thinking about your role as Director of Undergraduate Studies here, if teachers have particularly talented students who are really interested in computer science and might be destined for a place at Manchester University, what would your advice to them be?
Get in touch with us, come to our visit days, come to our open days, and talk to us. We're very happy to talk to teachers and do, if we can, put on some specific activities to show them what we do, and for kids to come as well.
That's great. Toby, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you. Subscribe to Kaz TV on YouTube for the great content that we've got coming up soon.